I have always been the quiet one in my family, the one who learned early that love didn't always arrive wrapped in warmth. It came in expectations instead. I was praised for being understanding, admired for being low maintenance, and relied on because I never said no. Somewhere along the way, I realized those words were just softer ways of saying I didn't matter enough to make a fuss over. My sister, Alina, had never known that version of love. She was celebrated loudly, protected fiercely, and forgiven instantly. When she laughed, everyone leaned in. When she cried, the world paused. And when she announced her engagement, our family orbit shifted entirely around her happiness. The wedding became everything. Every conversation turned into discussions of venues, dresses, guest lists, and something my mother kept repeating like a prayer: it has to be classy. Classy food. Classy decor. Classy people. It was said often enough that I began to wonder which of us didn't qualify. Somehow, without a meeting or even a proper conversation, I found myself helping financially. It started small: can you cover this deposit? We'll pay you back. Then it grew: emergency vendor fees, upgrades, last-minute changes. I paid quietly, telling myself it was family, telling myself love sometimes looked like sacrifice. No one thanked me, but no one questioned it either. I had become part of the machinery, not the celebration. I didn't expect a handwritten invitation or a dramatic moment. I assumed, naively, that being her sister meant I would naturally be there. The text arrived on an ordinary evening, right when the house was quiet and my guard was down. You're not invited to the wedding. It's a classy event. I read it once. Then again. My heart didn't break loudly. It sank, slow and heavy, like something realizing it was never meant to float. Before I could even respond, the family group chat lit up. My mother reacted to the message. Face with tears of joy. That emoji burned more than the words themselves. It told me this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was entertainment. My exclusion wasn't tragic, it was amusing. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in my hand, staring at the wall as memories stacked up behind my eyes. Every time I was told to let it go. Every holiday where I adjusted myself to keep the peace. Every moment I paid for something I wasn't meant to enjoy. I wasn't angry yet. I was embarrassed. Embarrassed that I had mistaken usefulness for love. Embarrassed that I had believed being generous would earn me a place. In that moment, something quiet shifted inside me. Not rage, clarity. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as support staff. And for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to convince them otherwise. I took a deep breath, lifted my phone again, and began to type, not as the invisible sister, not as the fixer, but as a woman who finally understood her worth. The invitation never came. But something far more important did. Awakening. I didn't reply to the text immediately. I just stared at my phone, watching that laughing emoji float on the screen like a neon sign pointing straight at my humiliation. The house was quiet, but inside, my mind was anything but. Memories started surfacing, one by one, like a slideshow I hadn't asked for. Every time I had bent over backward for Alina, every time I had paid for something she enjoyed while remaining invisible myself, every "it's fine" I'd muttered when they dismissed me, it all came rushing back. I remembered the engagement party preparations. I had stayed up late helping with color palettes, addressing invitations I would never see, and coordinating logistics that no one even knew I was handling. I had gone to vendors, made calls, sorted emergencies, all without being asked. They assumed it would get done. They assumed I would do it. And I had. I realized in that quiet, heavy moment that I had been invisible by design. Not because I was unimportant, but because I had allowed myself to be used. I had let my family equate kindness with servitude. I had let my love for them be exploited, masked as generosity. And somehow, the text from Alina had ripped off the last thin veil of denial I had been clinging to. When I finally typed my reply, it was calm. Steady. Firm. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I didn't beg to be seen. I just wrote. Understood. I'll cancel the classy payments, too. Then I hit send. I didn't know what I expected, maybe shock, maybe guilt, maybe 1,000 angry words. Instead, the response was mocking and dismissive. Don't be dramatic. She thinks she's important. You wouldn't dare. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That night, I made a list. Everything I had quietly funded, the premium floral arrangements, the upgraded catering, the seating plan that required extra deposits, the emergency funds I had set aside to cover last-minute classy requests. Every single one was mine to cancel. Every single one was under my control. The next day, I logged into accounts, called vendors, and methodically withdrew, canceled, and reversed. Each click was a whisper of liberation, a tiny victory in the silence of my bedroom. No threats. No announcements. Just action. My sister had assumed my generosity was infinite, my silence permanent. She was about to learn how wrong she was. And for the first time in years, I smiled, not because I was cruel, not because I wanted revenge for the sake of revenge, but because I finally felt the power of choice. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer a shadow in the background of someone else's celebration. I was seen. By myself. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need to be invited to a classy wedding to prove my worth. I had reclaimed something far more valuable, my self-respect. The quiet, calculated steps I had taken weren't just about money or wedding chaos. They were about standing up for myself in a world that had spent years telling me my place was in the background. And as I drifted to sleep, I realized that sometimes, the sweetest smiles are the ones you give yourself after finally saying, enough. The panic started subtly at first, missed calls from the florist, cryptic emails from the caterer, and a flurry of messages from the wedding planner that read more like warnings than updates. My sister's carefully constructed classy event was beginning to wobble, and I had not lifted a finger to stop it. I watched from a distance, silently, letting the storm unfold. The moment I had anticipated, the moment they realized that my absence was not a flaw but a choice, was finally approaching. And with each bounced payment, each declined deposit, each vendor demanding confirmation, I felt a strange mix of vindication and relief. Not satisfaction at their suffering, no, relief at finally reclaiming control over my own life. Then came Alina's frantic messages. Why hasn't the florist confirmed? Did you touch anything? Mom. She's doing something. My mother's calls were even worse. Furious, shrill, her amusement from before evaporated entirely. Why would you do this to your family? She demanded, her voice sharp with disbelief. I stayed calm. I let my fingers hover over my keyboard for a beat longer than necessary, savoring the stillness of my power. Then I replied with quiet precision. I wasn't invited. Remember? The silence on the other end was almost audible. It was the kind of silence that comes before people realize they've underestimated someone for far too long. Over the next 24 hours, the wedding unraveled in ways I had predicted but they had not. The caterer refused to set the tables without confirmation. The luxury seating arrangement, the one everyone had raved about, was cancelled. The floral arrangements shrunk to something far less grand. Each vendor, once eager to please, now demanded clarity that my family could not provide. And each time they called me in desperation, I answered calmly, repeating the same truth: I had been excluded. I had been invisible. And I had chosen to stop being used. My sister's voice finally broke through with raw panic, trembling on the line. How could you? You've ruined everything. I could hear the desperation, the realization that class and a wedding had a price. A price she had expected me to pay without acknowledgement. And now, faced with the collapse of her perfect image, she understood, too late, that her little empire of appearances relied entirely on me. I didn't yell. I didn't call her names. I simply said, class isn't about dresses, flowers, or fancy seating. Class is how you treat people who support you. And you didn't treat me like anyone mattered. It wasn't revenge in the cruel sense. It wasn't meant to humiliate. It was truth, delivered with quiet finality. I heard my mother sputter on the other end, searching for a rebuttal, a justification, some excuse to diminish me. But nothing came. For the first time, my family had to confront the fact that they had miscalculated. They had assumed my generosity was infinite, my silence unending. And now, as the chaos unfolded, as the carefully curated classy wedding teetered, they were forced to see me, not the invisible sister, not the fixer, but the person they had underestimated. And I sat back, watching, not with malice, but with clarity. For the first time in years, I felt the true weight of my own choices. I had stepped out of the shadows, taken my power quietly, and shown them that class, and respect, cannot be bought. The wedding had a cost. But it was one I hadn't paid. The wedding went on. At least, some version of it did. Smaller. Messier. Far less classy than the Instagram-perfect event my sister had envisioned. I wasn't there, and for the first time, that fact didn't feel like punishment. It felt like liberation. From my apartment, I followed the photos trickling in on social media. Pictures of slightly wilted flowers, confused waitstaff, and tables missing their most important upgrades. Guests whispering about the mix-ups, the cancelled orders, the tiny chaos that crept into every corner. My sister's carefully rehearsed smile didn't hide the tension in her eyes. My mother's perfectly polished facade was cracked in places I had never seen before. And I couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of justice, not because I had caused suffering, but because the truth was visible now. I had chosen a different kind of presence. I wasn't on the guest list, but I was fully in my own life. I wore a dress that day, not for anyone else but for myself, and I walked to a small cafe near my apartment. I sipped coffee slowly, watched the barista smile at a customer, and let the morning sunlight fill the space around me. Every detail of that calm, ordinary day contrasted sharply with the chaos my family was enduring. And I realized that my absence didn't diminish me, their presence in my life had never defined me. There was a strange satisfaction in knowing that I had finally drawn a line. I hadn't screamed or yelled. I hadn't posted screenshots or spread gossip. I had acted quietly, decisively, reclaiming control of what I had always given freely. And in that silence, in those choices, lay the true power of my actions. Later that evening, my phone buzzed again. Messages from relatives, panicked and confused, pleading for explanations. Calls from vendors, trying to negotiate resolutions. Alina's frantic voice, asking me how I could be so cruel. But I no longer felt the need to defend myself. I simply listened, offered only necessary facts, and let the consequences unfold. The chaos was no longer mine to fix. I had done my part, and it had been enough. Walking home from the cafe, I felt lighter than I had in years. The streets were quiet, the city breathing around me, and for the first time, I understood what freedom really meant. It wasn't vengeance in the traditional sense. It wasn't making anyone suffer for the sake of satisfaction. It was reclaiming my worth, taking my seat in my own life, and refusing to let others define it. By the time the sun set, I knew something fundamental had changed. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their recognition. I didn't need their classy validation to feel worthy. For years, I had let them determine my value, letting every slight and dismissal cut deeper than it should. But now, having stood firm, having acted decisively, I finally felt untouchable, not in arrogance, but in self-respect. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, settled into my favorite chair, and let the day wash over me. I thought about my sister, about my mother, about the wedding that had become a reflection of their choices, not mine. And for the first time, I felt a profound peace. I had walked away in heels, not as a victim, not as a shadow, but as a woman who knew her own worth. And in that walk, in that quiet reclaiming of my life, I found the sweetest revenge of all: freedom, dignity, and the knowledge that class, true class, is never defined by appearances. It is defined by how you honor yourself. And I had never honored myself more.